Our next guest is the CEO and head of Planned Parenthood. Please welcome Alexis McGill Johnson. Alexis, thank you for joining us. We're live for the first time in the South by Southwest studios. It's great to be with you. It's great to be with the crew. Thank you for coming.
Thank you so much for having me here. It's my first time at South by and excited that this was the conversation that South by wanted to open up specifically in Texas.
Well, in Texas, as you know, Texas passed the controversial Heartbeat Act, which has inspired copycats. And just today, unfortunately, we got the news that the Texas Supreme Court pretty much has upheld it. We see copycats. We see Oklahoma Senate yesterday passed their version of the copycat bill, also known as the abortion bill. Effectively, many say it's going to ban abortion. Yep. And we'll talk about what's happening in Missouri. But right now, with what happened with Texas Supreme Court, what's happening all across the nation, what's the future of Roe v. Wade?
Well, look, I mean, here we are in Texas, 6 months into SB 8, which is not just a bill around as they claim, a heartbeat, right? It's also a bill that is enforced by this incredibly perverse incentive, which essentially amounts to bounty hunting, where it allows anybody in any state to make a decision about your personal abortion and essentially receive up to $10,000 if you receive an abortion after 6 weeks. And so the idea that Oklahoma has now passed similar legislation, Idaho as well is on deck to do so is really devastating, right? It's had a chilling effect on abortion provision because of the financial cost to providers. And it is impacted the state of abortion, essentially rendered it meaningless in a state like Texas. We've seen an 800% increase out of the state now to gain access. And if Roe is overturned in this decision that is before the Supreme Court right now, Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health, which is a 15-week ban, what we will see is 26 states that are poised to immediately ban abortion. And so the idea of what is the state of affairs, we're talking about upwards of 36 million, people who could become pregnant, being affected, having to drive out of state or fly out of state to gain access to basic health care.
And for those who don't know, look, many women don't even realize until much later that they're pregnant. So this stops at 6 weeks. Most women have no idea. It takes 8 weeks, 9 weeks. So they're like, I didn't even realize I'm pregnant. Oh, and now this bill, essentially you take away my right that's been guaranteed for the past 50 years through Roe v. Wade.
That's right.
And you're now incentivizing essentially bounty hunters to come,
yes,
like rat out on me, and they get paid,
right,
and then they have control over my body.
So to surveil.
If I'm wrong about that assessment, let me know.
No, I mean, you're right, because you actually understand how a body works, right?
I paid attention, right? I paid attention.
You know that, like you start counting your period, like day one, right? So 4 weeks is literally the earliest that you could even, most people would have a missed period. And then you're talking, so say you're diligent or vigilant about kind of tracking your cycle. Now you have 2 weeks, basically actually even a little bit less than that, to get an appointment, to get into a clinic, to have 2 ultrasounds, right? 2 transvaginal ultrasounds, like talk about invasion, 24 hours apart. That would, essentially, and if a technician hears something or even mistakes the ultrasound machine for a, the electrical impulse that they are saying is a heartbeat, that means you no longer have access to abortion in the state. It means you have to get into, like I said, get in your car, maybe with your child and drive thousands of miles to Colorado to see a provider, right? I mean, it just is insane.
And the critics say, well, you could just go out of state. This is a state, and we have the majority, and the state legislators have passed this. I think it's important for people to know that not everyone has the resources.
Yes.
There's a pandemic. Not everyone has a healthcare provider, right?
Yes.
There are people who come from low-income communities. There are people who come from rural communities,
yes,
right? And like you said, some people have kids. They have jobs. They can't just pack up and just leave the state and I'm gonna go. I'm just like, it's like some lighthearted trip. I'm just gonna go get an abortion out of state.
Like road trip, yeah.
Yeah. And so,
totally,
I mean, the impact on this is profound on 51% of the population. And as you're sitting here with Planned Parenthood, you're like, is there a part of you that says, we should have saw this coming? We should have it's hindsight's 2020. We could have done something different. Do you sit here and I'm sure you're like, what could we have done to maybe stop this moment? And maybe that's a tough question, an unfair question.
It's a fair question that people are just waking up to understand, right? That we are literally 6 months into this crisis in Texas, is now having a ripple effect across the country. We have the Supreme Court decision looming, and people are waking up and they're saying, wait a minute, I thought Roe was protected, right? It's a constitutional right. It's been here for 49 years. Wait a minute, what happened?
It has 70% backing. Correct?
Yeah, 80% backing, right? There is no state in the union where banning abortion is popular, right? So even
in the reddest of the red states.
Even in Texas, in Mississippi, and Missouri.
In Mississippi, if you don't mind me asking, and we'll get to Missouri in a second, what's the favorability rate, if you will, for Roe v. Wade to keep it?
I don't have the actual
it's a majority.
Yes, it's still majority,
Okay.
right? And so literally, like when I say there's no state, there is no state. And so in hindsight, what could we have done differently?
Yeah.
I mean, essentially the reason we are here today is because what we've seen at every turn over the last decade is the opposition claim power in state houses, in the courts, right, over the last 4 years under the kind of Trump-McConnell administration, remaking the judiciary all the way up to the Supreme Court. And then allowing these bills to flourish outside of the, where their constituents are. And so the reality is the courts can't save us, right? Our legislatures are the only place where we can stop these horrific bans. And they are incredibly gerrymandered, because these are also the states that are taking away our voting rights. These are also the states that are increasing restriction. And the people who are most impacted by these, as you mentioned, low-income BIPOC folks, but they're also people who are undocumented, right? They can't travel outstate. I heard about a patient yesterday who was in foster care, right? A child, literally 14-year-old, not able to travel outside of the state to get access. So we're really going to force a 14-year-old into parenthood? Like, it just makes no sense.
And also, we don't have paid parental leave as a guaranteed right in this country, and we don't have subsidized childcare. I'm a parent, so
same.
So it's one of those situations where you and I are of a certain age where we remember the horror stories of pre-Roe.
Yeah.
And the horror stories are, and we should be very blunt about this, is that women who do not have access to abortions, they didn't sit there and go, oh, well, okay, I'll go ahead with this. But the ones who did not want the baby for multiple reasons, they committed self-harm in trying to get rid of that pregnancy. And so is there a fear here that with 26 states now, with these copycat, which are getting more extreme, we're going to talk about Missouri in a second, what's the harm? It's not just the rights, but the physical harm to women that's going to happen?
Yeah. Look, we know that people, what we know is that these bans do not stop people from accessing abortion or trying to access abortion, right? Or trying to end their pregnancies. That is, what will continue to happen. Are people self-managing abortions right now? Absolutely. And I think we should support, where we can, people to get the right medication that they need in order to manage their abortion. But we also know that they will be vulnerable. They will be preyed upon. There will be, I heard about a patient last week in Texas who received what they thought was medication abortion online, and it turned out to be nothing more than sugar pills. So they were still pregnant.
Fraud.
2 weeks later. Yeah, so there's fraud, all of these things that are going to happen that, again, how do we protect the patient? And that's what we have to think about in this moment.
When it comes to protection, you're talking about that these bills are going to punish those in state, right? But we're also seeing that there's loopholes now created in these states to punish women who try to go out of state.
Yes.
Can you talk to us about what's happening here, the new evolution of these restrictions?
Right. So there have always been bills, particularly over the last decade, to shame providers, these targeted restrictions that really focus on abortion providers, making it harder to stay kind of to keep agencies alive, to support patients. There are laws that stigmatize the patient themselves, right? And and we see this in the bounty hunter, right? Incentivizing surveillance. We've got people in parking lots taking pictures of license tags, and calling into numbers. We see it similarly with the trans bill in Texas too, right? Like the ways in which we're empowering everyday citizens.
Also against CRT,
yes,
which is not taught, by the way, in elementary schools, but the same copycat language of incentivizing parents to come rat out on teachers. That's happening also in Florida.
It is happening, and it is So what we are seeing is this kind of extreme example, right, of like, they've created this fake problem, and then they create a set of policies as like a response to it. And what we see is actually the impact, again, on patients, not just in state, but, now saying that you cannot travel out of state to access abortion. We're seeing in state, in the hospital system, the chilling effect that it's also happening, right? So it's not just abortion providers that are independent or like a Planned Parenthood. We're seeing, physicians in hospitals who don't know whether or not they can provide abortion care to someone who had an intended pregnancy, but the pregnancy is now, has some complications and is not going to be viable. So they're literally telling the patient, you're going to have to go home. You're going to have to go home and wait until it becomes more of a problem for us to actually treat you, because the hospital administrators won't let us do so.
And so an extreme example of this that just happened in Missouri, and this trended yesterday, was a Missouri bill was introduced,
yes,
in which a woman with an ectopic pregnancy, which by the way, that's not viable at all, right? Essentially, the bill says you have two choices. You either carry this ectopic pregnancy, which you won't be able to carry, which will result most likely in your death or serious harm, or you go to jail. Exactly. Am I making? I got that.
You are 100% right about that. Right?
So it's an ectopic pregnancy, which is not gonna,
which is in your fallopian tube, right? It's not even made it to your uterus, right? That's what makes it ectopic, right? So it's not even, in a place where it will get nourishment to thrive. We're talking about can it rupture your tube and actually make you vulnerable
it will
to
kill
death?
You to death.
Yes.
And if that woman at that time says, listen, my doctor says I have ectopic pregnancy, I have to get this out or I'm going to die. The other alternative is death or jail.
Right. And we are already, you see our maternal mortality rates, right, that, are astonishing and alarming, and the impact of that, particularly on people of color, particularly on Black women, 3 times more likely to die during, after childbirth. It's insane.
And also women from low-income communities, women from rural communities. And so that Missouri bill, which was so shocking to many of us, and we saw it yesterday, I had to do a double take. I'm like, no. Oh, wow, I read it.
Right.
What's the likelihood of that being a copycat in other states? Or do you think that's so far just limited to Missouri? I
mean, one would have thought that SB 8 was so far that it would just be limited. I think they are pushing the boundaries, right? Because I think, here's the thing. None of these bills are about, what is medically safe for the patient, right? They're all put under the guise of protecting the patient. They're all about control. Yeah. They are all about power. And so, will we see copycats? Yes, because there will be other legislatures that believe they are the ones to make better decisions about our bodies than we are. And they're the ones who are going to continue to push the boundaries because they really want to be clear about who controls whose body.
Talking about power, there seems to be a shift. Correct me if I'm wrong, this is my assumption. Last 4 years, last 5 years, there seems to be a regression, a deep fear in America that says we have to take this country back to when it was great. When you do the data, apparently it was great in the 1950s. That's this romanticized vision of America, right?
But for whom?
Well, so this is happening it seems like a blitzkrieg, but like you said, it's been building at a local level and a state level, but now it's getting mainstream. Attack on women's rights, attack on LGBTQ communities, especially what's happening right now in Florida and Texas, right? Attack on people of color, books written by Black and brown authors, but especially when it comes to women and this full-scale assault on women's rights, this overturning almost of Roe v. Wade, which has been settled for 50 years. Yeah. What do you think is the main animating factor that is propelling this movement right now in the past 5 years?
I mean, look, at the end of the day, what you're talking about is essentially maintaining white supremacy in all kinds of ways.
Well, you said it. You said it.
I'm just going to name it. Patriarchy, misogyny, white supremacy kind of are all kind of at the intersection of all of these freedoms, right? I mean, because I go back to 1950s as being the heyday, again, for whom, right? My mom, would have to go to, ask her permission, her husband's permission to get birth control, right, from her provider.
It was not that long ago.
Not that long ago, that's what I'm saying. We would be in segregated schools, right, pre-1954.
And even after 1954.
Yes, long after, right? In fact, we're more segregated now than we were pre-1954. So, there's so many challenges that when we think about kind of what is really at stake, it's this narrative of becoming a minority in this society, and it just doesn't bear out. And so that fear and that anxiety is animating a lot of this.
We're taking on white supremacy, like you said, or we're taking on misogyny. You're taking on misogyny and patriarchy. You took it on within your own organization as well, right? You called out the white supremacy of Margaret Sanger, right? And why did you? That's a big, bold. risk to to go there about the own organization that you had. Why did you think this was a particular time to call that out and to name this type of dark history of your organization?
You know, I think what I really wanted to do in that piece was to kind of stop the argument around whether or not Margaret Sanger was a racist or wasn't. I don't know what was in her heart, honestly. I know that she was relentless and passionate about women's rights. She was relentless and passionate about birth control, and she understood it in like true badassery fashion, right? That it was about making sure that people had the right to control their own bodies. And yet she also participated in a lot of harm, right? You know, sterilization studies in Puerto Rico, or not where she you know, didn't participate, but she kind of, you know, supported in various ways. She was so relentless that she, you know, went and talked to the KKK, the ladies auxiliary of the KKK, to, you know, get them involved, right? Because she felt like she could talk to anybody. And, you know, I thought it was really important to name our history and to also recognize the fact that we can't just say like, oh, well, that was 100 years ago and she's a woman of our times, because there are ways in which organizations and institutions are built unconsciously on some of these same principles. And unless we name it and force ourselves as individuals to reckon and as institutions to reckon with the harm, we will never move forward and actually build the true inclusive movement that we need in order to fight this fight.
You have to uproot and you have to plant new seeds.
That's right.
And so with the planting of new seeds, you have this new generation, right? The fear is this, especially in America. We don't really acknowledge a problem until it just confronts us in the climate change, racism, white supremacy. You know, 6 months ago when this was happening in Texas, you would assume people would be like, yo, wake up. But now it seems people are like,
like, wait, what's happening?
Do you think, unfortunately, it will take kind of this crisis of like 26 states when someone's going to go to get perhaps an abortion, they'll be like, nope. Do you think it's going to get to that level? Like, is there anything to stop it before it gets to that level for enough people to wake up to realize that women's rights are under active assault?
So here's the thing, like just with climate, where there's, you know, a lot that we can do around the edges, but we really need to do like major change. It is the same around sexual and reproductive rights, right? That this decision is going to come down in June, right? We already have 26 states that are poised to ban. We've had 6 months of SB 8 on the books, and 80% of support for Roe being the law of the land, and yet only 30% of people actually believe it's going to be overturned.
Yeah, that's the thing. People are like, nah.
No,
the guardrails will be fine.
And I think it's about who is being most impacted, right? In the same way, you know, COVID started and we were like, oh my God, this like crazy thing is happening. And then mostly brown people were dying because they were the frontline workers and they were the ones keeping the buses running and they were the ones opening up the, you know, buildings every day. And we're like, oh, well, they're dying. Oh, they have comorbidities.
Post article where, excuse me, a Washington Post article when some of the prisoners said, oh, it doesn't affect me.
Yeah.
Because it was affecting black and brown folks.
Exactly, right? And so it is when it starts to impact people in hospitals who cannot get the care that they need and they're being sent home until they get sepsis to come back. It's like, this is really alarming. So that the rage is going to come. Right, I'm not worried about the rage coming.
You're not worried about the rage, but the harm that's going to be done until then.
The harm is going to be insane, and it's going to take a long time to fight back. Right, that's the challenge. It's going to be harm for a long time.
You mentioned 30%.
Yes.
That's stunning because we know what's happening. How do you message then? What can Planned Parenthood do to change the conversation about abortion to get more people to care?
I think in some ways the overreach is doing that for us, right? What we're trying to do is tie the thread together. Say, yes, SB 8 in Texas. Let's talk about what happened in Florida. Let's talk about what happened in Oklahoma, in Missouri, in Idaho. Like, it is coming to a state near you. In just in the 2022 legislative session, right? So it's like, what, 10 weeks, right, that we're in this year? We have seen over 300 bills introduced into state legislatures in 41 states.
It's like on steroids.
So, and like the impact is like these bills are being introduced and also the ripple effect into the healthcare system, because if you have an 800% increase out of Texas into all of these other states around them, the surge alone is going to impact the quality of care. So everyone is going to be
during a pandemic.
No less.
Yeah, with a new variant coming up every couple of months.
Exactly. So just the reality is of, again, these individual patients, and you hear their stories, you hear them, talk about one patient said, I got to Planned Parenthood. She's a victim of domestic violence. She's like, my partner doesn't know I'm here, right? Like, how am I going to get back to here again another 24 hours later, much less get out of state? Like, that's the reality that people are facing, and that's what we have to share and let people know.
And also victims of incest.
Yes.
Victims of rape.
No
And now we're telling these women, you got to carry that baby full term, even though
or life of the mother, right?
Yeah.
Right, exactly.
Or with ectopic pregnancy.
Yes.
It's a frightening time that we're in. But do you see sometimes people say things get worse before they get better. Sometimes things get worse and just get further worse. Do you see some hope here where it's galvanizing this young generation of women to actually stand up and say, no, we demand our rights? Do you see in the last 6 months a type of groundswell?
An energy, for sure. I mean, look, I think I have been, after I heard the oral arguments, and I've been, in this movement for, over a decade, and I've seen the kind of chipping away at the right, and we've been kind of putting lots of fingers in the dams, and then you get to this point where you literally hear the oral arguments, and the courts have been the only thing that have been our backstop all
Not
of
anymore,
these
though.
years. Right, but not anymore. And I said, what is it going to mean for us, for all of us, right? Not just me as a leader of Planned Parenthood, for all of us to preside over the end of Roe. And I thought, not only are we going to be presiding over the end of Roe, we have to preside over the reconstruction of our rights, right? We have an opportunity to imagine who we are going to be when we are no longer defending Roe, because it was never a law that was grounded in equality, right? It was never a law that was grounded in freedom. We have the ability to build a much more inclusive, multi-generational, multi-ethnic way, multi-faith movement that really will be grounded and connecting the dots between all of these movements and these fights that we're having. So honestly, I am somber about what is happening to patients across the country and people who are experiencing extreme barriers. But I am hopeful about kind of where the movement will go because of this.
Alexis, can you give me a specific, for those who are watching right now, they realize what's happening and they want to fight, they want to organize, they want to get involved at a local level. Because oftentimes people feel powerless.
Yeah.
What can people do at a local level to protect women's rights?
Yeah. Well, good thing is, like, all politics are local and all healthcare is local and all the fights right now are local and then in each state. So the first thing you can do if you want to get involved is text to 22422 to get signed up to Planned Parenthood's list, and we can help deploy you by state. Supporting the people, the patients who are on the ground in these states by going to your local abortion funds, which are resources that again are going to need to help people get out of state and travel. Register voters. Vote, because that's actually the thing that's going to make the biggest difference.
And run for office.
Hey, run for office.
Why not?
Yes, exactly.
We have some really low-hanging fruit running for office and actually getting elected.
That's
so I'm thinking
Some
people can run for
boards,
office.
Yeah.
A final question, I got you for 30 seconds. You said it's a somber time. We're facing lots of challenges. But what is giving you joy right now?
Ooh, what is giving me joy? It's just such a privilege and honor to do this work and to be on the ground with the folks and the providers, and seeing their resilience is giving me joy, because I know, like, there are days where I don't have hope, of just to be honest, right? Because you see what's before us, and I think the challenge is to not let what is before us overwhelm us. And so days when I don't have hope, I just say I have purpose. And I'm really clear that I'm going to stay as unapologetic about fighting this fight, and that's giving me joy.
Alexis, if people want to support Planned Parenthood, what's the website?
PlannedParenthood.org.
Thank you so much for your time. Thanks so much for the fight. And hopefully people are listening. They feel encouraged and empowered to do something to reclaim their rights. Thank you so much for stopping by, Alexis, and joining us for the first time in 2 years live at the South by Southwest studio. You all can watch all of our studio interviews on the South by Southwest TV app, available on Apple TV, Roku, Android TV, and Amazon Fire. These interviews are also available on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/SXSW. For a complete list of our interview schedule, check out sxsw.com/studio. I'm Wajahat Ali. Thanks for tuning in.